From Shield Studio 22A, this is the Safety Synergy Podcast. I'm Elliot Laratonda. My guest is Matthew Olson. Matthew Olson is the Facilities Director for the College of Arts and Architecture at Penn State. Originally from Minnesota, he brings a diverse background in construction trades, including underground utilities, masonry, welding, and bridge building. Olson holds a BFA and MA from Minnesota State University, Mankato, and an MFA from Penn State. He previously served as shop supervisor and a teaching professor in the School of Visual Arts, specializing in sculpture, woodworking, metalworking, and mixed media fabrication. His work has been exhibited both locally and nationally. So cool. Thanks for coming on the show, Matt.
Thanks for inviting me.
Let's talk about your background a little, if that's cool with you. Tell us about your background in the trades. How'd you kind of get into that line of work? And then specifically, when did it kind of turn more for art for you?
Well, I didn't go to college right away after high school. I grew up on a farm, and I just had this inclination for making things and fixing things. And, I think I was driving legally at like 14 or 15. So I was like welding when I was 10, 13, making things. Cows would break things. The bull would come over and break the fence or something. So I had to learn to weld, stuff like that.
Yep.
But then in high school, I took classes like that. So I had this natural like path towards either construction and or like manual, like doing things with my hands,
Sure.
that intersection. Because I always, grew up in a time where, these influential toys, erector sets. I mean, that predates me a little bit, but constructs, Tinker Toys, Legos. I mean, everybody in the last 20 years that's been, building things always goes back to like, oh, I worked with Legos as a kid. Like,
Yeah.
it's the foundation blocks, literally the foundation blocks for many things, and design of things. It's just, they're so versatile. So, I mean, that kind of led me to, I started working in construction. I had a pretty good background, just basic background and working with my hands and, field work and machinery and stuff like that. So I just started working construction. I joined the Laborers Union in Minneapolis, Local 563. I was in that for about 6 years. And within the Laborers Union, you can kind of move around. You can be a mason. You can be, you can't be like an electrician, but you can be a mason. You can be, you can do welding and stuff like that. So what I ended up doing was did a little bit of like underwater or underground utilities, which is like sanitary sewer, storm sewer.
Yep.
I remember being like 35 feet underground, with sand, big piles. I mean, OSHA has kind of been involved with my life and safety, like since I was like 18. So that, things like having to do with, being buried and, digging ditches so they're safe, stuff like that. So I've always been involved with confined space, all that training through the union. So,
Gotcha.
So for me, this is just another like revising or adding new training at this level in my life. It's just the basic 10 I think I've done 3 different times in different capacities.
So early on, right out of high school, going into kind of the trades, safety was a part of your life because of these hands-on type or labor-intensive jobs you've had. But then did you always do art on the side? When did you morph your work in that like physical labor into art that I know you still practice now?
I mean, it's hard to say when that moment was, but I mean, I think as a kid I drew a lot. My high school was one of those high schools or school systems were one of those where, they didn't have the funding for arts. So they had the same art teacher for like 8th grade through 12th, which is basically now like a middle school / high school. 130 kids per class, I think at the time. That was almost 30 years ago. But so I think, I drew a lot. So I had like this inclination to draw things, I said, but I never really did a lot of artwork and like 2D painting like that. I still don't do a lot of that. But it's just the way now, like anytime I draw something, I draw it with the purpose of not sketching, but more like a refined drawing if I'm going to design something. But now I use Rhino or AutoCAD to basically do all the line work, because then I can export it either as a drawing or use that for the next process, which could be CNCing or laser cutting, whatever.
So whether it be wood or metal, were you doing art on your own time personally before you got into your college program where you were doing it for a grade?
I think so. I think so. I was doing it on my own, just like if someone needed something made or something built, I was like, okay, because he's artsy or whatever, let Matt do it. And, I drew like a couple buttons in high school or homecoming. I mean, I have one. It's when I look at it now, I'm like, oh my God, I'd give that kid a C, at least maybe a C if they're lucky. But Yes, I gave myself a C as a drawing student 25, 30 years ago, but nowadays I'm more refined. Like I have more drawing with purpose.
Hmm.
Uh, but but yeah, so I think, but when I was building bridges, working on the bridge crew, like those bridges were like giant sculptures to me. Like the framework that I used, even as I still use as a sculptor. I remember working at construction. Like it's all about the foundation, the building blocks,
I
all
see.
that stuff ties into materials have meaning, materials have feelings. Sometimes you're able to impact what you can do to those materials. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes, it's all fasteners. Sometimes it's welding. And
Hmm.
what I was doing, bridge welding over top of the Mississippi River or something like that, it was just crazy. I was 20 years old. I don't know too many 20-year-olds that are doing
No,
it these days, at least the ones I worked with.
sure.
Um, it was such a lifestyle that it really demanded like everything you had.
Yeah, got it.
And you were on the road a lot, so it was pretty dangerous for a kid that young to be making that much money by themselves.
It's a good
Um,
experience
it
then.
was
Yeah.
great, and it led to the next thing, which was like I don't want to do this forever. But it allowed me to see a perspective of making and importance on functionality and even aesthetics.
Hmm.
Because even though it's a bridge, when you look at it from a distance, it's like that architectural idea of, approach and arrival. Like, it has to be just as good when you look at it when you're on it versus when you see it
Right.
from a distance. And
Yeah.
so I personally, that I know of, none of my welds failed, which is good. And, when they do, you got to go back and fix them. It's a big pain.
Yeah.
So like you do everything right, and everything I did was all routine. Like I had routine. It's like the Japanese tea ceremony. Like I was cleaning everything and making
Mm.
sure everything was perfect every
Yeah.
time, because when you prep it and you weld it and like that and you get it all done, you move on to the next one. It's very much like a factory line where you
Yeah.
just like focus on one thing at a time. I'm not worrying about this. I mean, I'd always think about lunch or something like that, some sort of outcome positive that I can look forward to.
Sure.
But again, it was like being at a level that like I said, it was different than a different type of job that I've ever had,
Yeah.
because I always had to function at a high level, because I was either hanging from a crane, or way up in the air, or I was doing something that was
Yeah.
very dangerous or
Sure.
had the capacity to become very dangerous very quickly if I forgot to hook up a lanyard or something like that, or I
Yeah.
dropped something and it hit
Yeah.
someone 50 feet
Good.
below.
So it's appreciated that the idea of relating like the foundations of like construction, building construction and materials to art, but it'll then also allowing some of your principles of art to like influence the trades and those skills that you have there. So I see, how you're applying one industry kind of to the
Hmm.
other. And so it's kind of fascinating. Not many people have that background. You meet people that are maybe more in, the construction industry versus you meet an artist. It's really hard to find the intersection of both, which sets the context really well for, potential listeners of who we're talking to here. So after school, after 2 master's degrees later, you found yourself at Penn State in your teaching role as assistant teaching
Hmm.
professor in visual arts. So tell us about that teaching role, the classes that you led, some of the experiences for students, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was at like a really interesting intersection and an opportunity to work with students on a different level than we'll say most people, because I was an instructor, professor, assistant teaching professor. I mean, the name changed throughout the years as they adjusted, but essentially, I felt like I was a teacher. I was doing
Hmm.
what I wanted to do, what I set out to do. When I was 21, and when I decided to go back to college at 24.
Hmm.
Um, but I think what ended up making it different was, for me, I was like wearing two hats simultaneously. I was a shop supervisor, so I was like good cop, bad cop, constantly fighting with myself, as in like, okay, I have to not let the emotions of the student take over here and just be the person that's like, no, you need to work on this or that. And I guess that was a convenient position for me to be in, but also at the same time, when I wasn't the teacher of that class, I was still responsible for those students, and I took that on as my own students. But because they all worked with Mark and I couldn't have ever did any of that without Mark Rizzo, and I hope that he feels the same way. We did a lot of things that were really special there for like 10 years. So working with all those students with different ranges, capacities of even patience, I guess I could say at
Yeah.
this point, and because some people, this just wasn't for them. But for me, I tried to make the most comfortable thing. And so either as a teacher or as a shop supervisor, that was my classroom. So when I was teaching in like a different classroom, say foundations, I still had that principles as in like, you need to learn how to do this before you can learn to do this. Not the so much learn to walk before you can fly thing, but there is a point where once you show the students how to use something or give them the framework to then build from, you've given them that agency then to then be more autonomous and make decisions for
Yeah.
themselves. So
So you mentioned foundations. What
Mhm.
is that course?
Foundations is actually an area. It's typically in all the schools, even across the different units. There's usually a foundations level. It's the 100 level. It's the most intro level that you come in when you first take classes. And then say the School of Visual Arts, there was 3 different classes. I always taught the Ideas as Objects, which is Art 111, and it's a 3-dimensional course, and sometimes it's the first time any student has ever worked with their hands, and I don't mean like, picking up and moving a shovel and stuff like that, but it's like interacting with tools,
Yeah.
knowing how to thread, or put a drill bit into, I mean, just basic things that I've taken so for granted since I was like, I don't know,
Yeah.
5, 10, whatever it was when they had, tools at my disposal.
Yep.
That I always brought it to them like, okay, everybody is starting at the same level. And the ones I look out for were the ones that thought they knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
The kids that were, that coming in, like my dad's a contractor, like, oh, that's great.
Yep.
Well, we're all starting at the same level. You still got to sign the paperwork.
Nice.
But I never had any issues with that because, I knew that I was the one standing in the way of whether or not they were going to be able to use the equipment. If I set up a situation where, I allowed them to learn the information, but then also, like I said, take it from there.
Yeah.
That was the important part. So that teaching was always present, whether it was instructing a tool or teaching, a concept or
Yeah.
something like that. So for me, that marriage of teaching and making are two, even though they might be separate, for me, they were exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because I always learn best by doing, like the doing like certain things, like learning how to use a table saw and like welding. Like you need to actually be on the bench doing it. You can't just say,
Watch
just
a
push a
video.
little harder, maybe go slower. Now, I could probably say that, but the person isn't going to be able to track that immediately. Where it's
right.
like, okay, if you slow down, raise the blade, all that stuff is like, this actually will work better.
Right. So just to keep everyone up to speed, right now we're talking about Matt's previous role as both shop supervisor and a teaching professor in the School of Visual Arts. So you taught foundations, which gives all art students kind of that 100 level course to get hands-on with tools, equipment, fabrication, whether it's the metal side, the wood shop, maybe over with other medias in, say, sculpture or whatever. Any other courses come to mind other than foundations? And I'm guessing through foundations, they were assigned certain projects that would improve their ability to use these different tools and media. So could you clarify that and then touch on like what, if there's any other classes that you could point to?
Yeah, to that point, like you want them to learn certain key like priorities, whether it's, understanding the difference between, negative and positive space, or like, if they're carving from a block reductively, like carving around it, making the shape is one thing, cutting into the middle of that thing and being able to balance that visually and structurally, like that's a skill. Like
Sure.
you can't just pick up in, immediately. So that was a foundations level, but I was fortunate that when I taught in sculpture, I taught a couple classes. One was I taught a couple times actually. It's more of a 400 level like lecture course, but there was a studio component, and it was called The Art of Connection, and it was it was theory, but it was also like applying like your personal story or your connection like from an object and making that into a piece of artwork. So I did that during the pandemic one time, and it was a good class because it allowed students to make something remotely that wasn't exactly you didn't have to have a table saw and stuff. Like you were literally, like some people were sewing together 1,000 beads, using some sort of thing. Like
you did it independently,
right.
from
So
home
it's
and stuff,
almost like an independent study course. But then the other course that I taught several times, incidentally, with my wife, who teaches in sculpture, was Art 330, and it was like a mixed medial metal fabrication, which is like my like bread and butter.
Exactly.
So with that class, you really get involved with, different aspects of welding, arc welding, TIG welding, MIG welding, torching, all kinds of metal fabrication processes, milling, lathing, all that stuff. That every project was different. So it was different than the foundations where you're all using the bandsaw to do the same kind of thing. So like they would come up with an idea and basically you just kind of swoop in and figure out, crash course them in 20 years of expertise in 12
Gotcha.
minutes of a demo. And I did that for 10 years,
Yeah.
and that's still what I think I could do today. I could walk into
Sounds like
almost any shop and just be like, I could make you a frame in about 25 minutes if you have the material.
yeah.
And
Sounds like you're most excited about that, where students had their own idea or project and they had their autonomy to make it happen, but then you act as like the consulting expert on, well, here's how to do
yeah.
it. We need to make sure you have the skills and safety to do it right and everything. So that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think I liken it to like working at the hot dog stand at a state fair or like a huge event where you're just like, you have things on the menu, which you provide. And then you always have everybody coming up asking for like, well, I want this, this, and this, but we don't have relish. So, okay, I have to figure out a way to make relish.
Yeah.
And, it's like, well, I don't have that particular vegetable. So how can I make something that looks like relish? And I have a machine that can do that. So let's pulverize this green looking material to make it look like relish. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's part of the appeal of being in like an environment where you're running around with your head cut off, but at the same time, everybody has safety glasses on and shoes. And closed-toed shoes, your arms or your clothes are everything's.
We'll get more into the safety stuff.
Everything's all pulled up,
okay.
but you can have fun, but you still have to maintain that foundation level. Like, okay, this is serious business. It can go awry at any possible moment.
Sure. So tell us maybe about some personal projects, whether it was through your role in there, your use of the shop, or I know you still practice some personal art and everything. So I have some categories there. Anything sculpture come to mind versus wood versus metal versus a mixed media thing? Anything you could share that you're proud of?
I did a lot of sculpture as an artist myself. I did a lot of steel work because I was a welder. So for me, like that's my idea was like, I'm going to make this brutalist like steel sculpture and
What's something that we could like visualize?
Well, one thing that I've made that most people won't see, I mean, these things came up all the time over the years, is Old Main, someone from Old Main reached out to me and they had this 166, this is 2 years ago, so 166-year-old newel post from the original stairwell of Old Main, like a post, 6 feet
like
tall, made out of wood, right?
Yep.
And they're like, is there anything you can do with this? And I'm thinking, what do you want me to do with it? I said, I can't change it at all. So it had a little thing in the bottom, little notch in the bottom. So I made this stand out of metal. And, most people, they'd probably just weld it. But I went to the point of, I cut everything out and I TIG welded the edges. Some people just use MIG weld and grind the crap out of it. I actually just, welded it really nice, and it's about 14 inches in diameter, and it holds up a piece, like I said, that's about 6 feet tall.
Yeah.
And it's sitting in her office somewhere in the main office there. So,
Nice.
And you only know it's something I made because when you open it up, turn it over, there's a thing welded on the bottom, made at SOVA 2023 shop or something like that. So I did that. I did a couple things. I did one thing for the School of Agriculture. But again, like that's the kind of things that just kind of come up and you're just like, yeah, I'll do that. Sounds fun.
There's something hanging on your office wall, a wood sculpture.
Oh yeah. Well, that's personal sculpture. So artwork I made when I was faculty, and even now, I make more functional work now, but yeah, I'll take like an idea, like, going back to that idea of the art of connection. I'll take a personal story, and that's what a lot of my work kind of the emphasis is either a story or a particular time period or like an event or even an object. Like in that case, it was this steering wheel that was from my grandpa's tractor that when I was a kid. I was like 7 or 8, and apparently I wasn't strong enough or I was too young to take hay bales and stack them on the hay rack.
Sure.
But my grandpa decided I was old enough to drive the tractor.
Nice.
I mean,
classic farm boys.
Yeah, people decide how to raise their kids different ways. So, I mean, that's how I was raised, where I'm like, just throw him in there, let him drive the tractor. He's not going to fall off the tractor, which I didn't. But I probably could have hurt myself, having a hay bale that was, trying to lift that twice my size.
No doubt.
So like, anyways, that memory of using the tractor, my arms are like this big, so I made this wood ring, and I
That's
made
right.
it out of the wood from my grandpa's farm. So everything keeps tying back to memory. But
Mm-hmm.
those days that I had when I was a child, I think that's applicable for a lot of people. Where you're like, oh, I see, like a tire swing. Like I could do the same thing to almost anything, right? You're
Yeah.
like, I remember when my grandpa used to push me on the, or I used to go swimming or fishing, and you have all these memories, and it's like you can extract from there a seed that
Mm-hmm.
you can then develop,
Yeah.
right? And that's how I would teach students, as in like, you don't have to come up with all the ideas. Sometimes they're just there.
Mm-hmm.
And that knob I carried around, the suicide knob they call it
Yep.
on a tractor. It's a tractor assist knob. And I carried that around for 25 years. We did I mean, I wasn't even in undergrad. I just kept it in a box. I wasn't thinking about it. I'm like, I'm going to use this one day. And of all the things I think I could have used it on, thank goodness I didn't just slap it on something stupid
Yeah.
and be like, yeah, that's good. I got that check out of the box.
Yeah.
This is one of the best pieces I ever made, because it means so much. Because it was my same tractor, my dad. My dad actually had that knob put on when he was a kid.
Yeah.
Same situation. He couldn't steer the wheel. It was too big, and he was a kid. So
Wow.
his great grandpa, or his grandpa, so my great grandpa. So it's like 4 people use that
Yeah.
tractor, that knob.
Yeah, I just want to make
Um,
sure, anyone listening appreciates that. So that suicide knob, we
yeah,
called it, right? The
yeah,
the assist knob on the tractor is now on an oversized fabricated wooden steering wheel
yeah,
that's on your wall behind
yeah,
where you sit.
yeah,
And what that's symbolizing is, back when you were a kid, you appreciate those memories and remember that steering wheel seeming like it's, this big. Well, now it is that big on
right,
your wall,
right.
and you use that real piece from the tractor as part of it. And I still can't wrap my head around like how you fabricated that, because it's like, imagine, right, the people maybe listening, right, the circumference of a steering wheel,
Yeah.
right, completely out of wood, like all from scratch, and as wide as it is, on the wall
Well, I
there.
mean,
So
part of learning how to work with materials is understanding what their capabilities are too. And white oak is like really good at bending, right? Either it's steam bent or just regular, even wet bent
yeah.
or even dry. But so essentially, what that was quarter sawn white oak in a
Mm-hmm.
board. Like basically, it started out like 5/4, which is like inch and a quarter, whatever.
Yeah.
And you mill it down, and then I would put strips, and I just offset the table saw with a little strip side on there. So I just kept the same side every time. It's like 1/8 inch, and anything more or less than that, you either risk breaking it or it won't bend as well, right? So 1/8 inch quarter sawn white oak, about 1.25 inches thick, is like perfect for bending. If you want to get like a 30 to 6 inch, like diameter
Mm-hmm.
wheel, which is what that was. But I was trying to go all the way around it. So I made this elaborate jig with all these holes, and it was all MDF with holes for clamps. And
Yeah.
every day for like 3 weeks, I glued up one piece. And it's like 14 layers, right?
Yeah.
And so every day I'd glue one, and then I'd meticulously, carve off where the old one, the glue came out. So I would make sure I have a good joint, and I'd glue it. And I wasn't willing to risk because
Wow.
I knew I couldn't go back and
Yeah.
fix it, right?
So these strips are the whole circumference.
That's all it is. Yeah, it's just stripped, and then
Okay.
and then
And then
once you
you
have it in square, then you take a
router.
router
Yeah.
or a spoke shave or a combination of things that doesn't fit on any machine. But a lot of the router, with a round over bit and
Yep.
stuff like that. Even then, it was so much handwork that I'm like, oh, this is a stupid idea. And then I hand turned the spokes and the center and everything, and
Oh yeah,
lined
that's
everything
right.
else up, and made it so it actually hangs on the wall with like one bracket, and then another thing comes up. And so I used a number of different things, but I did it. You know, it probably took me about a month and a half to actually fabricate all the rest of the stuff, but just the time it took to get to that point with all the
Right.
parts. Like I always made things in parts, and it always brings me back to Legos and Tinker
Yep.
Toys, and everything was, made into hubs and sections that can then, give you different
Yeah.
options.
Yeah. Cool.
Um, so like the multi-tool is the ultimate tool in my book, just because it can do so many things,
For sure.
and the things I don't even know I'm going to use with it for,
For sure. Yep.
that's how you
It's a
break
must
them.
have. So we'll switch gears a bit, and maybe, so again, to keep everyone up to speed, we were talking about Matt's previous position and some of his artwork and everything as shop supervisor, as a teaching professor. But now we'll kind of transition into your current role as a facilities lead representative for the college, as well as your lead safety officer role for the college.
Mhm.
And first, let's set the playing field for arts and architecture, that unit. Let's kind of name, if we can, we don't have to cover all of them, the departments or programs within that college. So we talked about the School of Visual Arts, SOVA, and I'll let you continue.
Yeah, so you have School of Visual Arts, School of Music, School of Theater, architecture, which encompasses architecture, landscape, and graphic design.
Mhm.
Um, Within the different schools, you also have like the Blue Band, you have the Eisenhower within, you have the Center of Performing Arts within the Eisenhower. So I like to look at it as being like I have 21 buildings that we operate in, like
Okay.
spaces. Sometimes it's a room, sometimes it's a closet, sometimes it's the entire building. Sometimes we share it with within the college. Sometimes we share it with other colleges. So 21 buildings for all of these amazing things going on, and all these facilities have different requirements as well as needs,
Mhm.
and all of them are constantly being used, and you know faculty, staff, students, public.
Yep.
So there's all these different parameters that go beyond when I was in the shop,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So I have like the other shops as well, not to oversee, but just to kind of, support in terms of any logistics
Yeah.
and sometimes, getting things done.
So let's highlight some of the key facilities
Hmm.
and then maybe safety implications of each of these like kind of groups that we talked about. So the world of theater, you have the School of Theater,
Hmm.
so student-led productions,
Hmm.
and Playhouse being kind of the main venue. But then there's the downtown theater, and there's also Pavilion Theater. So
Hmm.
three different venues I can think of off the top of my head. Main implications there are probably the technical group, so shop and scene support operations, the different shops within that group there. Of course, fall protection for technical operations, electrical safety, kind of a wide profile for those groups. You also have the Center for Performing Arts, which is the group that will bring in kind of external entities like Broadway
Hmm.
shows and come
Hmm.
to Eisenhower Auditorium. There, definitely, you have the full, blown programs that would apply to any of those complex shows, lighting, rigging, operations. So both for the group of theater and Center for Performing Arts. Then we have School of Visual Arts, which includes fabrication, sculpture, ceramics.
Hmm.
Any I'm missing there?
No, they've always kind of bridged, the different technologies too. Like they don't have a standalone giant, like Stuckman is a CNC machine and
Yeah.
stuff, but they have laser cutters. And then we've always had this partnership with the school or architecture and Stuckman that, this natural collaboration. And even then with theater group, same
Yeah.
thing, like those three shops, um, even though there may be a redundancy in some of the machinery, like what they do with those are much different.
Yeah.
Like, I like to think of architecture like you're building the giant building, right? Visual arts, you're building, the sculptures, the work that may go into a
Sure.
building, and then theater, you have somewhere in between. Like you may have in between, room size to set size,
Yeah.
like designs, but it all comes from the same point. Like they all need the same sort of foundation level. Like you start from need, design, concept, and you work yourself through.
Mhm.
But through all those threads, you're utilizing the same sort of equipment and the same sort of like requirements on safety and
Yeah. Yeah.
just
Yeah.
all those guidelines are so universal, that I'd
Sure.
use the same thing in my own shop. I mean,
Yep. Yep.
for the
Yeah.
most part, there's no reason why you decide to like, oh, just because you're not in this space that you wouldn't do it. So
Yeah.
I think that's one of my goals for the college is to try to unify those three things because I
Yes.
have a lot of experience, and I think it's beneficial that we have that. Not maybe so that you can just go from one to the shop to the other, but just the idea like all of our people who are really good at what they do and they're really passionate and they're really concerned about people's well-being and
Hmm.
safety and giving people, like I said, the autonomy and the agency to do things that they want to do because this is what they choose they want to do with their lives,
Yep.
right? So
Yep.
why
Yep.
not support them while they're here,
Yeah.
give them the best opportunity, but also be tough love on them. Like you really need to pay attention when you're using this saw because you may not have a hand if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's things like that where it's just like I'm glad we have really good people that are totally like on board as in like, this is the way it should be done. It's like we all went to the same school. Some of us did actually.
Yeah.
Actually we all went to the same school. So never mind. So we all went here.
Yeah. Yep.
In some respect, three of us went to Soba. So I mean, and I've worked with two of them.
Hmm.
So it's really amazing when you think about that, and like we all have the same common goal, which is like make it safe, make it productive, make it memorable, kind
Yeah,
of thing.
exactly.
But there's so much that happens in between there, and my goal is to just try to make whatever connections that those people may need possible,
Yeah.
whether it's financially or support them through some sort of whatever program. Just give them the opportunity, give them the tools as they're giving students tools
Yeah.
to use stuff.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good way to summarize the
Um,
current role there. And to finish off that prior thought, School of Visual Arts, we talked about the implications of the shop environment. Definitely coatings. There's going to be some painting or other coatings or surfacing
mhm.
kind of operations there. Ceramics, of course, with their materials, mixing up their clay and coatings, and the kilns there. So different gas-powered kilns and operations there. There's also a casting facility, a metal casting
Mhm.
facility in visual arts. And what else did we talk about? Architecture and landscape architecture, mainly the shop area there. Definitely a fair amount of hot work done in that facility. They have a full blown shop, like you said, CNC. They also have heavy use of the laser cutters, right? Because people
Mhm.
building their models of the building that they're designing.
Yeah, and that's becoming the way it is as a result of having technology.
Hmm.
Like when I first started at Sova, even 15 years ago when I first came here, like they may have had one or two laser cutters in stock, but now they have six, I believe, four that they've basically added to the two originally, and
Yeah.
everyone was hand cutting, with utility blades, and of course, no one realizes like a utility blade is probably more dangerous than any other tool
Yeah, it
you
could
will
get you.
literally ever use, because they're so small
Yeah.
and they're handheld, and you overlook the idea like, okay, this thing is extremely sharp, and it's even more dangerous when it's not sharp. And the main thing you got to remember is like the easiest thing, like just don't cut towards yourself.
Yeah.
Just don't cut
Yeah.
towards yourself. And yet my hands look like they ran them through a cheese grater. If I were to like be able to see all the cuts, it's
Yeah.
like just you try to tell yourself, just don't cut towards myself. But that's the main injury that I got out of all those
Yeah.
years was either tiny little cuts, and it happens in graphic designs. It happens anywhere where people are
Sure.
asked to put their finger that close to an object.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
the shop area, it wasn't bandsaws, and like the table saw had the saw stop.
Hmm.
Bandsaws don't have saw stops, but they're big enough machinery, and you follow the rules on keeping things low enough, the guards low.
Yeah.
Like your hand shouldn't be anywhere near it, but like a sander, like for some reason,
Get your knuckle up.
oh my gosh, it's like I never could teach scare tactics because I'd have no fingers left. But
Yeah.
like every time I did an orientation, like 50 of them, like stay away, stay away. And at some point, I just like 15 or 10 years ago, whatever it was, I took gun bluing and I literally gun blued it on the table, like a little spot where not to put your fingers in
Right.
it. And that was the most important thing. Like if you remember anything from me, kids, don't put your
Yeah.
fingers past this, which means even the piece of wood, your fingers shouldn't be on it.
Talked
It's
about
too
cheese
small.
grater. Yeah. What about music? Any implications when I talk about our specific venues? We have the kind of the newer recital hall, which is nice. And then we have catwalks there, and so there's like lighting
Yeah. I
applications
mean,
and everything, fall protection
I
there.
think
But
from like a music, like in any performance based, you're
hmm,
thinking in terms of risk assessments, in terms of like how do you exit this facility when you have 2,000 people and the show's
sure,
on,
yeah,
and like how do you do that in a respectful way that you're not you know going
yeah,
running over each other.
large assembly areas, evacuation planning, and
Yeah, I mean,
emergencies
so
for sure.
what we do is we work with police services. We meet with them. We talk to them about scenarios. We walk through things, and then internally, like the school theater has a really good program. What they would do an evacuation, like
Yeah, same with
the
theaters.
stage people know to go somewhere else, and
Hmm.
the back of house or front of house they know where to go somewhere. They have this like teamwork that's like they learn that here because that's what works here. But then like it's like a sport where they could go to a
Yeah,
different team in a different town and be like,
yep.
all right, this is theater standard. Put your hard hat on before you go out in the middle of the thing,
There's
because
some pretty strong industry
it's
standards in that.
it's so amazing. Like I'm
Yeah,
so proud of that because it's like I don't have to worry about them caring about themselves. Like they literally want to care about
yeah,
themselves. And then by extension, the students. They're teaching them,
Mm-hmm.
industry standards, and we do the same thing, I think, in the other schools. And to the point of music, same thing. Like, this is how you should want to have your music heard in like one of the best facilities. And then on top of that, it's like, from facility standpoint, like the facility gives back what you can put into it. If you don't have great facilities, it's hard to believe that you can expand your program. And the same thing is said for safety. If you don't have people or an environment that is conducive for making that a safe place or wants to, and you don't have support, then it's hard to
Yeah.
do it. Then you're just gambling.
The phrase I'll throw out is you can't be safe unless you feel safe. And that's something that you kind of were alluding to there, making sure people have the resources they need and that they feel empowered to make safe decisions and there's teamwork and
Right.
communications are good and everything. And that's kind of the role that you kind of articulated earlier that you see is you're there to make sure people are empowered to do their art in the right facilities and as safe as possible.
Right.
So, but let's talk to some of the challenges about that. So, of course, one that always comes up is money, right?
Hmm.
Lack of finances and anything. Can you comment on that, like kind of the state affairs or across all universities, right? Not just here, of course. And then could we maybe offer like ways to combat that, either from the facilities or safety standpoint? Anything come to mind on the challenge of lack of funds for safety or facility needs?
Well, I mean, I know I haven't had to use them because I've worked for the university or worked for like a company that had a safety initiative, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
have this backing already. But, if you were in like, say, nonprofit, there are programs, grants and stuff available. But again, it all comes back to, the community and the people that work there. Like if you have people that are interested in doing that and want to follow up and follow through, then that's there. Financially, well, I mean, there's the university spends money in
Yep.
various ways that
Yep.
we don't really understand, including currently.
Sure.
Like that would be a lot of safety equipment I could get.
I know.
But um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just advocating, is constantly
Yeah.
advocating. Like it's important that we have this. It's important that we have it.
Yep.
Now, you do not need, like, some of our shops have 60, 70-year-old equipment in them, and they perform better than anything you could literally buy tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it's just gears and pulleys,
Yep.
and you just change the blades and
Yep.
grease it once a year kind of thing. It's like the perfect recipe, right?
Yep.
You're not thinking about the machine, you're thinking about what it can do,
Mm-hmm.
or can't do. But if you can have a good, as far as safety goes, if you have a good preventative maintenance program within your own shop that you can keep on top of things like that just to keep the machinery safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you don't have the machine, then you're trying to compensate, right? You're like, oh, we
Yeah.
don't need the guard, or we'll make our own guard. It's like, it's making your own guard or not having a guard is not worth someone's getting hurt,
Yep.
because if the guard only costs $10 and someone gets hurt and it's a workman's comp claim for $100 million or something
Sure.
like that, it's just like, gosh, I really wish we would just
Easy.
put that on.
Yeah.
But
S-
that's the thing. That's like,
Yep.
you have to have that mindset where you're like, this is more important. This is bigger than I am. This is more important, that we need to
Yeah.
advocate for this. And fortunately for the university, it doesn't take long. I mean, you don't have to like beg. I mean, if you legitimately like, I need this. And this happened probably 12 years ago, maybe 13, when I first started working in the shop. One of the students that I would, they were really great. They worked in the shop for years. They graduated. They came back. I let them be a super, or like a monitor, like a
Mm-hmm.
shop tech at night. And they
Mm-hmm.
were good because they were current enough to be an undergrad. They had friends that were undergrads, but still knew that they had to be responsible, be the adult in the room, right?
Yep.
And per the program, everything was fine to do it that way. And one night, I got a call at 9:30. It's the worst thing you can imagine. Someone called me. They were at the emergency room. She had cut her finger on the table saw. Well, this is before saw stuff. So, I mean,
You're imagining the worst.
imagining the worst, like it's completely off. I'm like, oh my gosh. So she just nipped it a little bit. So she didn't think it was serious, but I'm like, this is enough that I don't want to have this happen again. It never
Mm-hmm.
has, because literally we stopped using the saw for a week. I wrote a letter to my director, the dean, EHS. We all kicked in money. I think,
Mm.
we bought a saw stop within a day, and the thing was out to us in 3 days. We had it put together. So the interruption for the students was almost non-existent, because most of them can do without a table saw for a week because they don't even know what a table saw is, let alone what it can do,
Sure.
at least at that level. And it was just like it just worked out. It's the same saw they still have. I mean, they're great. I have one at home. You can't even buy one
Yeah.
anymore for the university
Yeah.
without that. But so like that's an initiative. Like, do yourself a favor and advocate for things that will help with safety, so you're not constantly worried about like how someone not gonna hurt themselves, at least on this machine,
Yeah.
because there's other ways to hurt yourself on a table saw or anything else. Like
Yeah.
anything can happen,
Yeah.
but a lot of it is just advocating, I think.
Yeah. So plenty to pick out there. Being a constant advocate for it, right? You may not get it unless you ask for it, right? So you have to
Yeah.
make that case, and ask for it because it is important. And in most cases, leadership sees that, but the case has to be made. And if you don't ask for it, you might not get it. The other thing that was mentioned was maintenance. Staying on top of preventative maintenance can save money in the long run, and making sure equipment is running smoothly, that kind of thing. Um, the one thing I wanted to add from like the safety professional perspective is always providing alternatives. I mean, we've seen this a few times where we come across a challenge where we have a hazard, and maybe the ideal solution is quite costly, because it usually is, right?
Right.
The best way that we can eliminate a hazard maybe altogether is quite expensive. So we always have to provide multiple layers, right? Based on our hierarchy of controls, this is the best option and it's the most pricey. Here's option B. There might be some downsides, but it's still really good and it's a little bit less pricey, versus option C, not so good, but probably the bare minimum and it costs less. So always providing leaderships those options to choose from is a good strategy. And then you also mentioned about groups chipping in. So we've had multiple occasions of this. We redid fall protection on one of our
Hmm.
catwalks because we've had facilities, OPP chip in, the college chipping in, and EHS chipping in, all contributing to a significantly safer workplace in getting fall protection the way it needs to be on those catwalks. So
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, I mean, there are so many things that I'm learning. I've been in this position for 2 years that the things that I'm helping support with some of the unit or the schools with, like we're doing things that will not only help students and staff and faculty deliver better programming and a safer situation. Is like, but we're also ensuring that these things will allow to go on at a much better rate, like
yeah,
installing those line locks in theater and
yeah,
then, more better lighting. I mean, yeah, it costs money to do that, but you only pay for it once. Like, and now these students, anybody can operate, whether you're, in a wheelchair or not, you can operate in the theater like how anybody would. You don't have to be subjected to have to not use the catwalk because you're either afraid of heights or you're not able to go up there.
yep. That's another strategy. Anytime that we can compound safety initiatives with, on that example, accessibility and ADA access, versus learning and education benefit, that's always another good tool to have in the back pocket.
Right. I mean, I think through some sort of abstraction, I feel like I'm still operating in that shop supervisor like role, that teacher role, where you're like in that the cart or the food cart at the state fair, where
Yeah,
you're constantly trying to figure out how to creatively solve problems, but not make it worse by subjecting someone to even more situations. So like I know enough, like if the building's on fire, it's like let's just get out.
yeah.
Let's don't worry about the saving
Hmm.
the whatever. Just get out. It's
Hmm.
not worth it.
On the note of creative solutions, that was my kind of next challenge in art. I think you'll agree with me. Sometimes there's a perception of like, well, we're artists and our creativity is different. Like, there's no OSHA standards for us, so we're exempt. We're
Hmm.
we're different. It's creative research, and there's no rules for us because we might have an industry in which there's not rules to apply,
Right.
and so there's logic there. Like, there's a reason why people say that. It's sometimes really hard to put creative operations in a box, because we all know like these OSHA standards are written for industrial
Yeah.
operations and construction and manufacturing and factories. But at the same time, though, I will say, we have to be clear that these are employees. They are governed under, workplace safety regulations and standards. But on the other hand, if someone walked in to say, the theater operations and tried to like put the letter of the law exactly to what they're doing, you're going to have a bad time. Like, it won't work out. There's definitely some unique cases where you have to
Mm-hmm.
apply some intent and be a little
Mm-hmm.
open-minded there. So anything else to comment to about the challenges of them being kind of a unique industry?
Yeah, I mean, artists are people too. So I mean, they're. It's not the same as when you say like, well, at some point, you know, the. It's just because I think when we've gone through this even internally within the university, like there was a point where would they identified that what chemists do in chemistry labs are a lot different than say me using emulsion to develop
Yep.
photographs in my photo room,
Yep.
because even though they both offer hazards and you have to use probably the same PPE for both, the potential of one causing massive problems, I'm guessing on the
Yeah.
chemistry end, by the way,
Sure.
is is more dangerous. So like the elevated sense of like, okay, this is really important. Why you need to have
Yeah.
ventilation. And I'm not saying you don't have to have ventilation in the exposure room, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it's a different thing and it's still applicable. It's just coming at it as in like, well, this is a standard. It's like, well, actually, we don't need that much water pressure. We don't need that much ventilation. We just need a window,
Yeah.
you
So
know?
I think what we're getting at, which was my next challenge, is sometimes painting too fine of a box, or putting artists, for example, in the same box as chemists. Th- Again, it's not going to be a great time for
Right.
anybody. They get
Right.
kind of put in this box. Well, they're research, but it's creative research. And so my advice to overcome that challenge is, we have to look at exposure. And if someone has exposure that warrants them being under a certain program, then we apply that program. But we wouldn't want to like group together, say, just for example, that ceramics mixes chemical A with chemical B. Well, they might mix powders together with water to make clay. We
Right.
shouldn't apply a chemical hygiene plan to
Right.
them.
Right.
We need to think about their exact exposure. If they're doing hot work and welding, then hot work applies. If they're working in heights, then fall protection applies. We don't want to paint them in a box in which they don't belong. We want
Right.
to treat each exposure as that unique exposure and apply the program that applies. I had some idea, some concepts of like kind of art and theater expressions trickling their way into maybe objections for safety. So, for example, I was inspired by the phrase "the show must go on," right? And I kind of the equivalent of that is like kind of time pressures, right? Like it's like, well, we got to get this done. The show's at on Friday at 7 o'clock. We have to get this done. So that's tough. I would say the way to overcome that is an emphasis on like being proactive and integrating safety into work plans ahead of time, as far into the future as you can, to kind of prepare for the unexpected, I guess, and be ready to anticipate that time pressures, because it's definitely coming
Yeah.
when it
Yeah.
comes to art.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about like in the case of like theater and performances and stuff, like they've spent like if you're going to do a theater production, they've spent weeks going over even where Johnny's going to stand.
Yeah.
Like so if anything goes off there, you have so many checks and balances. You have a production supervisor, you have assistant people, you have everybody who's literally been involved for the last 6 months, and then you have people who've worked in this industry for 25 years, and they're like, we never use that kind of light on this. Like, why would we use that now? It's like, well, this is specific to this show, just like it's specific to this particular type of, study. Um, but it's really interesting that, like the show must go on, as a metaphor. I mean, it's applicable because, to many different things. And I think it's just synonymous with theater, but it's like, it's the same way with anything else, teaching,
Hmm.
life orientation, like, we're planning on moving forward, whether you're here or not, and we're all on the same page as far as I'm concerned, in terms of safety and
Yeah.
procedures and stuff. And it's just one of those things where artists, whether it's all of whether it's musicians, theater, performance, and visual artists, and even creative writing and stuff, we're all kind of pushed into that same camp. But I mean, there's so many engineering and the different sciences that would benefit to having an artist in their decision making, or at least part of it, because they're going to ask the crazy question that, you're like, well, why don't we use that?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
like, well,
Think out of the
because
box.
like, well, why not? I mean, you've never did it before. So you're just saying like, and then that's where you get the good conversations and you're like, oh, and that's how they got the iPhone because we never did. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's really great having those conversations because I think at least in my intersect between like being an artist and being a facilities person, like they're generally different mindsets, like left brain, right brain,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I've always been that way. So for me, this is like the perfect situation because I'm advocating for and giving voice to the people that don't know what to say or don't know that they have a voice. But then at the same time, I know what the facilities aspect of is. I know what I'm arguing for.
Right.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I just can appreciate that whether it's a student trying to finish their sculpture project, their capstone, before the end of the year, the show must go on. I need it done.
Yep.
So I might push myself a little bit more, lean on this ladder and do what it takes to get it done
Yep.
versus, the more explicit version of that phrase is, theater preparing a scene and it has to get done by X amount of time. So there are some time pressures to combat with proactive planning and integration of safety. The other one I had is, it's kind of a version of like, well, stuff happens, right? And it's kind of like that's show business. I think like artists sometimes have this idea of like, well, of course stuff's going to happen. We have a complex job to do, and there's a lot going on, and look at all the people working around you. It's busy and whatever. So of course stuff's going to happen. So that's a big challenge that I think the main tool to combat that kind of vibe is that it's a bit different. These people are at work, is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
You're not doing your own creative
Yeah.
stuff on your own time at home. There's kind of different terms when you're at a workplace. There's expectations of safety and everything. So people do have to realize that there is a difference
Yeah.
of risk tolerance.
Yeah.
At
Like
work.
my dad's concept of using the chainsaw safely is different than mine.
Exactly.
And then
Yeah.
on top of that, that's different than say the person who instructs chainsaw
Yes.
at Penn State
There's
because
levels to that.
they're taking
Yes.
on. I mean, like I said, I was given an opportunity and the tools to learn how to use it, and I respect it because I'm afraid it's going to cut me. So we have reciprocity there. Like you do what I tell you to do, and if you're not doing what I'm asking, I'm not going to push you.
Yeah.
Because I know what happens when you push it.
Right.
So it's different levels of that, and just being able to, and part of like being in this position, whether you're in the shop or if you're safety related, is being able to understand like sometimes people just aren't thinking about that, and the last thing I want to do is like come down on them and say like, I'm less interested in like coming down and more like, okay, what happened? How do we prevent
Right.
this from happening again so that you don't have to go through this again, and someone else doesn't. So preventative maintenance or preventative, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
But you do have to take risks. I mean, artists and creative people do take risks, whether it's physically, economically, or politically, whatever, right? They
Yep.
do that. And they're
That's
not
the other
always
thing.
weighing out. Whereas like when you decide to use a machine where you're supposed to use safety glasses with long sleeves on and long hair and everything else, and something happens, there's not much you can say besides,
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly what I was thinking around. Like artists typically are not exactly risk adverse,
Right.
like because you just said they're typically pushing boundaries because it's their expression of art, and so that I think at times could creep in to operations,
Mhm.
and it's sometimes I think that's why it's a partnership, right, between facilities, between safety, between artists, and all to say, just so you know, that there can be different expectations. You're the artist. I would never, question the technical team on how to achieve the lighting for this set, right?
Right.
But
But
they
how
can
you
stay
climb the ladder and get up
right.
there is
So it's a
important. Is
team
just as
effort.
important.
They stay in the creative artist lane, and you help from the facility side, and I help from the safety side, and we all swim in our lanes and make the team, succeed for better. So
Yeah.
that's a great point. The other bullet here that I just wanted to call attention to is that there can be industry specific standards that can be quite helpful. We refer to ANSI standards a lot. ANSI standards in performing arts and theater,
American
fall
National
protection.
Standards Institute.
Yes.
I remember that from like 30 years ago taking drafting in high school. Like
I'm impressed.
yeah, and it hasn't changed. And I'm sure that's the standards haven't much either.
So that's helpful. So switching gears again, kind of going back, we had lots of conversation around shop safety, but I know that's kind of where your heart is a bit, and we'll kind of return to that if you don't mind. So touching on some fundamentals of machine shop safety oversight. The first bullet I had was guarding. So I wanted to call out some common misconceptions that have come up, not just in the arts or whatever, but elsewhere. Some folks think that old equipment is like grandfathered in, or they might think, oh, I bought it like this way, it came that way. So, what's wrong with it? It was manufactured in that way. But one thing's for sure is there is no grandfathering in of old equipment. And unfortunately, manufacturers do not have to produce equipment that is
Right.
OSHA compliant. So we do find things, and unfortunately, it's not an excuse that we can accept. Another one that we come across in guarding is sometimes it can be a challenge. Like we might come across some moving part, mechanical hazard, and on the surface, we might say, "Gee, I'm not sure how to guard that. I don't think you can." But one thing I wanted to call out is just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's impossible.
Right.
And
Right.
what we know, folks like you, that's what you droll over. Here's a
Yeah.
hard
Yeah.
problem to
Yeah. Yeah.
solve.
Yeah.
How can we do this? And so I would never underestimate the a tradesperson, an artist, or especially if they're combined, and those folks' ability, maintenance professionals, their ability to provide you a fabricated solution for guarding.
But that being said, there's also the other skill set that you learn, and that's to know it's not worth trying to. Like there was remember the masonry saw, the
Yep.
death saw, we like to refer to it as, is just massive concrete saw that
Yep.
was like Frankenstein together with another thing, and
Sure.
I just inherited it. And when I had an opportunity
I
to
see.
get rid of it, I said, send it to Lion
Yeah.
Surplus. And I don't care what happened to it because it's not the university's problem. It's not our problem anymore. But it looked just like the miter saw in the shop. It acted just like the miter saw in the shop, but it had this massive diamond blade on it for cutting like brick and, like stuff
Mhm.
like that for like kiln building. It's like, it wasn't part of this. It couldn't be guarded with the level that you could have done to make it safe. You might as well just get a handsaw and
Yeah.
spend 5 more hours throughout the
Yep.
next 20 years cutting
Yeah.
hands bricks, because the level of unsafe, it was just not worth it. So that's an example. Like
Yeah. For
they don't
people to
make guards for that kind of
Exactly,
stuff.
yeah, for people to visualize, it only had the upper hood, so, like, the top half of the blade was covered and didn't have, like, a self-adjusting guard
Yeah.
on this, like, kind of chop saw, and so that's a great example of actually where eliminating the hazard
Yeah.
altogether, which is a
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
approach,
Yeah.
higher on the
And it
hierarchy.
was sitting outside, and like, someone that does tile work or brick work, this is going to be a great machine for them. It's an
Yep,
old industrial machine,
yeah,
two or single phase, 240 volt. It was massive, but it's just like, it wasn't worth that when they make saws at Lowe's or Home Depot that do the same thing without being
yeah,
terrifying.
gotcha, yeah. The other thing that I wanted to clarify too is a lot of times, from the safety perspective, folks might come in and say, this needs guarded, it's a hazardous moving part, whatever. But maybe their superficial solution can kind of make the tool impossible to use. The appropriate guarding solution can't make the equipment useless. Like
Right,
that's
right,
never the
right,
approach.
right,
There always
right.
has to be some balance there to, of course, make it functional. Next fundamental is training. One of the bullets I had there is the use of an operator's manual. I think far too many times people provide their training to say students or staff or whatever to say, hey, this is how I do it. This is how you should do it. An important critical component is referring to that manual because we really are, whether it's through liability or for just general good practice of safety, we need to be held to what that
Yeah, yeah,
manufacturer
yeah,
recommends in the
yeah, yeah.
manual. And this leads to the point about, remember we talked with Alan the one day of like, does it make sense to make kind of standardized SOPs for shop equipment? And Alan was like very, helpfully said, no, what we really need is kind of an SOP for an SOP, the
Right.
template. Like,
Yeah,
what are
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
expectations for us to build an SOP? Because the content of which will populate that SOP will come from the manual, first of all,
Right.
and then also specifics of our shop environments because they all can be different. So I thought that was like
Right.
really helpful. And then finally, my point here was that I do recommend for any shop environment that they do have SOPs for each of their operations or equipment. Now, of course, you can't have an SOP on everything, right? There's so
Right.
many techniques
Right.
on a
Right.
table
Right.
saw. Your SOP would be, a novel, right?
Right.
But for common operations, what to do, what not to do, there should be that SOP inspired by the operator's manual. And that SOP should document your training content, because what has been a common theme in my career is, okay, an incident occurred. Was this person trained? Yes, it was trained. Okay, maybe you even have some record of that, right? I see
Right.
some initials by in a date, but then it's like, how do I know that this information specifically,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
example, use two hands while doing this? How do I know that that information specifically was transferred to this individual? So I think it would always be pay dividends to have your training content documented in an SOP. That SOP serves for a standard sequence of operation and expectations of use. So lots of good stuff there. Anything to add,
Yeah, I mean,
regarding
I
training?
remember that, initially, we were talking about having, everyone be different, but yeah, I mean, it's true. Like it doesn't matter. Like in the case of saw stop, like that'd be a good example. Like
Hmm.
all the different shops have a saw stop. I'm pretty sure that the Stuckman ones are the same as the one they have in the theater one. The visual arts one is just different model. I
Right,
mean,
right.
it's an industrial cabinet, but it's just different model, right?
Hmm.
Maybe the horsepower is different, but how you turn it on, how you activate, how you change, all that stuff is the same. It doesn't matter if you're doing a miter cut or just a dado cut with
Yeah,
the dado stack or not. Like you're still turning it on, turning it off, doing all these checks and balances. Like you're operating the saw. So yeah, preaching, directly from the owner's manual does work to a point, but like it is important to have that one-on-one time. I think people too
sure.
for the times where you're like, okay, this is the instance where we're not going to use the riving knife because it can't go on there with that, and you explain like why
Yeah.
that is, and then you
Yeah,
realize
if you're
like
not like you're not gonna do you're using, say, maybe a sled, and you're not gonna do a through cut. Well,
right,
you can't physically have the riving knife
right,
on there. You
right,
won't be able to do that.
right.
So
No, it may say that and say like once you get if the owner's manual is that elaborate. I mean that's. I'm sure it does say that, but it doesn't say that according to whatever sled I've made. It just
no,
says
yeah, yeah,
remove or lower. So like there's things like that where it would be beneficial to have like an SOP like to inquire like what are the basics on this machine and the hazards like because you can't go into every possible thing it can do, every adjustment it can do,
right.
but you can hit the to dos and don'ts. You can talk about why how bad of an idea it would be to put a round object on the bandsaw because it's just going to spin out of control. Whereas if you
Hmm.
put that on a miter saw, it actually pushes into the fence.
Gotcha,
So there's all
gotcha. Yeah,
these
yeah.
things where it's important to do one thing versus the other. But again, if you have a person who's just kind of a shoot by the hip kind of person anyway, and they just kind of gotten lucky for years, they're
Yeah.
probably not going to be interested in delivering the soliloquy
Yeah.
on on how to properly use this or that. But I geeked out about it. For me, I mean, I did it was like a performance, like
The training
yeah,
aspect.
like
Yeah.
hour and a half. Like I that was my deadline. Okay, the way hour after an hour and a half, I don't have anybody interested in me anymore. Little alone,
Oh, we better push it then.
yeah,
No, just kidding.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So if you're only interested in an hour, stay tuned.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we could do these as yes or no's, maybe,
Okay.
just as an experience. Should just anyone be able to work alone in a shop?
No, no. I mean, I think well, according to there's policies
And
and
we don't have to be specific to Penn
okay, we'll
State.
get into policies here.
Yeah, think about, yeah, like
No, I
universally
don't. I
best
don't
practice.
because yeah, I think about it like the worst situation I want to be in is coming across or coming up to somebody that let's say they were using a tool and they hurt themselves and they passed out, right? They seen the blood and they passed out. That's
Yeah,
one thing, but you don't know that. All you see is a big pile of blood and you're like, oh my
yeah,
gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, what? And you're trying to, you know, figure out what happened and you realize, okay, they hit their head, they fell down. It has nothing to do with the tool, but it's still running. So there's things like that where it's for reporting and safety for the well-being of your own personal self. I mean, maybe it's important. So
So
even
no
at,
one should be allowed to work alone? Do
I,
you think buddy system always?
I think as far as students go, yes. Adults like in our home shops and stuff, it
Okay.
is possible. Because I'm not in a race against any kind of time frame to get
Yeah.
anything
Well,
done.
even in the workplace, let's
Yeah.
say. So you think it's fair? And this is fair. I do, by the way.
No, I don't think like people who have access, if you have a key to that room and you're able to use that equipment as in like a staff or
Mhm.
like not a grad, I mean, like I said, you go into the policy of Penn State for the grad
Yeah.
students and
Like
stuff.
you, for example, going to the shop.
I know enough that I'm not going to try to use the table saw to cut
Yeah.
a certain size piece of plywood because I know that A, I'm not that old, I'm not that young anymore that I can handle that, and B, it's like it's not worth. I know I'm not going to cut my finger,
Yeah.
but
There's other
that thing
things.
could come flipping around on me so fast because I've seen it happen just
Mm.
in a millisecond. You're like, oh my gosh, that thing came flying right back at
Yeah.
me, and it can happen to anybody,
Yeah.
right? So
So
those are times where the buddy system is important. Well, but I turned thousands of hours in the shop on, by myself on what is never 3 o'clock in the morning or anything, but
yeah.
it was the point where like, I'd tell my wife like, hey, I'll be back in a couple hours. If she hadn't heard from me in a while, then obviously,
Yeah. So
something's
in
wrong.
general, I think we're saying, qualified employees, probably okay. Students, probably not
Yeah, yeah.
okay. I think there's another layer to that, and this is kind of our approach at Penn State, where there can be risk profiles of different machines, and
Yeah.
that could play a role. So let's leave it at that. What about directly monitoring? When or in what scenarios should an individual have literally eyes on them? How would you characterize that? Like any and all students? Does it again depend on competencies or what machine they're using?
Well, I
Just
mean, during the day, it's actually pretty easy to fix that problem because most of the time you have someone around
Right.
that's running the shop. But like, let's say in the evening or weekends, and not all of our shops do this, that they're open. They're not open to the public, but they are open to the students that have access. And yeah, I mean, I think that as long as you have someone there, you're never going to have the perfect scenario where you're like, oh, I have this grad student that happens to, they spent the last 12 years of their life being a master craftsperson, right? It's not going to happen, right?
Yeah.
They're here for their education, not fulfilling some pipe dream that I have of having a perfect third wheel access. Because that did work out once in a while in Sova, where Mark and I were both fairly accomplished, on both sides, metal and wood, and then we had a grad student that was really inclined on one or the other, and you're like, oh great, this is going to be perfect. It's like we never left.
Yeah.
We can keep having students come in all night long. We don't have to do all the work during the day. That scenario is so unlikely that it's like, okay, we're just going to deal with monitoring that person. As long as they know what they do, the safe thing is call police services.
Yeah.
Call, like, just have the right frame of mind is just as important, I think, than having a person that literally knows how to use every tool in the shop, because that's not their job, is to instruct you how to use that. I mean, if it's a monitoring position.
Yep.
Like air traffic controllers don't know how to, maybe they don't know how to fly a plane, but they know how to, the mechanics of getting it safely from here to there and here up in the sky, and they know the implications if that doesn't work right. Like a pilot doesn't need to care about that.
Yeah. They
So
might know enough to know the rules to say,
Yeah.
Hey, Johnny, remember you're authorized to use this equipment,
Yeah.
not that equipment. So,
And depending on the shop, like that's actually already kind of laid out. Like there's certain places where maybe not Penn State yet, but that you have to swipe in. And like, if you have authorization to use that high level machinery, then you can do it on your own. You don't have to have
that was my next question.
one of the
It's
people.
Thoughts are about access control. So, and we can use Sova's shop as the example. Is this physically locked at night so that no one's coming in? Okay. And what about weekends? You have maybe some staff or no?
I mean, it all depends on just back to the budget. Like if you have an extra budget, you can pay, but you can't pay a work study student, which happens to be an undergrad probably. But it's just historically, some of the shops like theater, they probably don't do it. Sova, we just couldn't afford it. And even though the need might have been there, like I knew after, all those years, like Saturdays were not that busy. Sundays were not that busy, but Friday afternoons and nights were, because then they'd cram. But Stockman's always kind of been open because they have the same kind of thing where like students, they're in classes literally they don't have time outside of their day. They have to do all their stuff at night. So that they're working 3 o'clock in the morning, and they don't have access to the shop, but they have access to the laser cutters and the other stuff. So But it's all about planning. With students, it's like learning how to juggle too, like classes, personal life, and then other things in between that you're kind of in control of, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a challenge, especially now as we see more and more of these like maker spaces,
Yeah.
and we talked about, Origin Labs and everything.
Yeah.
It's tough because, like you just said, a lot of students, they're kind of only available after 5 p.m. But that's when our like qualified staff and maybe monitors
Yeah,
are
yeah,
going home
right.
for the
like
day.
who? I mean,
So
if you had a, if you had in your opinion, like, or your option, like, why would you want to work, the overnight shift? Like when I worked as a mental health counselor at a mental health hospital for
hmm
like 6 years, and I worked the overnight shift while I went to undergrad.
hmm
Like I only did it because it was a state job, it was good money and retirement, and everything else,
yeah,
and it was at night. I did all my studying at night. I couldn't make artwork in there. You couldn't bring it into fac- facility that was intended for like keeping people safe. You couldn't bring like X-Acto blades in, right?
right, yeah,
So I just read. I read all the time, and I did all my schoolwork, like lectures and stuff like that, papers. But I wouldn't have chosen to like disrupt my sleep rhythm for like 6 years
sure,
if it wasn't helpful. But it
sure.
was.
All right,
Um,
one more section. Let's do rapid fire because we'll close up after this. What's one thing, scenario, technique, not just a generic hazard, but what's one thing people need to avoid when using the table saw? How could they get into trouble? Table saw.
um, well, it's when someone tries to either cut something without the fence or tries to cross cut something that's just too small. Like there is a
Yep.
rule on what side is what, but
Yeah, like longer than it
for
is wide,
for
for
the
example.
hour and a half it takes to make a half decent crosscut sled, totally worth it. And I don't even have a
Okay.
miter saw at
So no
home.
free hand
Yeah,
cutting, you
yeah,
might
yeah.
call it, on the blade. Okay, that's
It's
one.
not a
Yeah.
bandsaw.
Circular saw. Everyone
Same
has
thing.
one.
If you want a crooked cut, you use circular saw.
Yeah. So
Because
just don't use it.
yeah, I mean, well, I do, but I use it more like Tommy Silva does off of This Old House, like a lot of hand cutting over the, you
Sure.
rest the board on the
On your
table or
foot,
your
yeah.
knee and you hold it out, but that's not something like students don't use circular saws just because we don't do a lot of work outside of the shop. When it's
Yeah.
like bandsaw makes crooked cuts, curved cuts,
Yeah. It's
and you
more
can
of a
put it on
field
the
tool.
table.
Yeah.
It's a field tool. It's a portable
Carpenter tool.
tool. Because it's portable, you feel like, oh, because it's not connected to the wall or to the floor, like it's not dangerous. But like
Oh,
circular
yeah.
saws are incredibly
No
dangerous,
doubt.
right?
Yep, that's why I asked. So to recap, for table saw, we had Matt, no freehand cutting, like
Yeah.
right kind of cross cutting without a fence.
And bypassing, if you don't ever have to bypass, just for whatever reason, you're like guessing, like this might set it off. Like just don't do it.
Oh,
Don't bypass if you don't have
for
to.
like a saw stop, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And removing any,
yeah,
metal or whatnot.
yeah,
For table saw, I had like rushing to grab your piece before the blade stops, reaching over
yeah,
the blade for any
yeah,
reason,
yeah,
not using a push stick. Because like, well, I don't feel like grabbing it. It's over there, right? I'm gonna get a bit
yeah,
closer. And I had putting a hand like for any reason, like I'll say behind the blade, and then like kickback occurs, and you get kind of pulled into it. That's a bad day. For circular saw, I had any like binding that you get and you might cause like kickback or whatever once it frees up.
yeah,
Not using two hands. I know we've all been there, but in general, if you look at that manual, typically it's going to instruct two hands on that circular saw.
yeah.
Any awkward body positioning, so like cutting like vertically or from a ladder and stuff, that could get you, I'd say. Mostly corded circular saws that might not have a blade break, so that the blade's going
Yeah.
to continue to run. And then anytime you get into, because of the geometry or your stock, right, where the blade doesn't adjust because you're cutting it like real close, maybe you're just cutting a strip off, and you like you take your finger and you pull back the blade. That's
Yeah.
a bad day. What about miter saw? What's one thing that could get somebody on a miter saw?
Well, a lot of I think is that when you put the board on the wrong way and it binds like that arbor that just
Yeah,
scares the crap out of you, right? And you forget you let go of everything.
yeah.
You let go of your hand operating the saw, you let go of your hand holding the board, hopefully,
Maybe
and
because it's warped or something.
it's
You're
warped. And
saying,
if
yeah.
you remember this, like if it looks like a banana, you want the curve. You want the curve to curve out. You don't want it to curve in because then when you
Okay,
cut, they slam into the blade, and that's what
interesting.
wedges it.
Good pro
Um,
tip. Yeah.
so like I said, if you're gonna have a banana, you'd want it so that the banana is curved towards you, so
Away
that
from the blade.
you're looking at the curve,
Yep.
because then when it breaks away, it breaks
Well, good to
away
know
like
because that's
that.
every single board from Home Depot
Yeah,
or
no
Lowe's.
kidding. Like miter saws, I mean, they're great tools, but they can also, like I said, they're so approachable, right? You're like,
Yeah,
oh,
no doubt,
trigger,
no doubt.
pull down, do this, bam. I mean, they come.
Everyone's first tool.
It doesn't
probably, yeah.
matter if they come with a laser or they retract or a dust collection. Like
Shadow is the best, by the way.
that would be the one thing where like an SOP is applicable to everybody, like crossing your
Yes,
hands,
that's a good one.
all that stuff.
I had, again, kind of manually adjusting the guard. That's a bad day. Cutting things that are too small, right? If you literally have to hold your hand an inch away, that's it.
Right.
Or not like clamping stuff. You're kind of, things are loose. That's bad. And then of course, just reaching in before the blade stops or it's in the upright position. So the guard is protecting the majority of it too.
And also if it's too small of a piece and you happen to have like a dust collector like you've made and it goes rumbling and bounces around and comes back and hits you.
Yep.
I mean, that was always the biggest fear, because in the shop you'd have like a dozen students and you have one person who isn't wearing safety glasses, like sitting to the left of the table saw or the miter saw, and that thing goes flying. You're like, okay, everyone has to wear safety glasses no matter what when you walk in here, just because stuff goes flying, right? I mean, it's a foreign object.
Yep. Wood lathe. That's one I didn't have.
I love
before,
wood
'cause I'm
lathes.
not- what's the one thing that could get somebody?
Well, entanglement, obviously, that's what started the machine shop program here at Penn State, from the student that got strangled at Yale. And it wasn't even in a wood shop; it was just using a lathe. But the concept is there, like roll up your sleeves, long hair, anything like that, keep it. But I use a wood lathe all the time. They're so versatile. I mean, it's just amazing what I can do with mine. But I understand like the risk. Like this thing is strong enough to rip me around with
so
it.
hair, jewelry, sleeves, anything dangling to really eliminate entanglement.
Yeah, and then never. I mean, I make a point of never using my hand while on the actual object while it's running, because if my hand comes down and slips between the guard, I could lose my. Oh God.
Okay. So hands off.
Oh yeah, I mean
on.
everything. The only thing that ever touches is my tools.
Yep.
And it's nice having my own at home, but it's for the longest time when I was at Sova, I mean, I bought and I maintained it so it was always in good shape, so that we didn't have anything go wrong like that. But I don't use the full guard like they do, like they suggest, just because in my case, it's so
along
much
the whole stock.
Yeah.
Just a chuck guard.
I just use the chuck guard.
Yep. Makes sense.
Even then, sometimes I don't use it because I got nothing on there. I even have the tool rest and everything is away, But I have one that articulates out, right? So I can do many things that another like spindle lathe can't do. So, they're just, any tool you use, you have to understand how it works. You should never just assume you could just walk up to it. I mean, just imagine, I like to think of like a tool being like a wild animal. Like it does what it's supposed to do, and it will do it until someone stops it, which is in cases unplug it or feed it, or whatever you want to do. But like, a horse, if you come up behind it, doesn't matter how old that horse is, it will want to kick you because that's its instinct. Like, get out, don't do that.
The tool's going to do exactly what it's supposed to do.
Tool do what it's made to do.
It
was engineered to cut and process wood and wood-based materials, and it will do that.
Yeah.
Until you tell it to stop. Cool. Or you blow a fuse.
Yeah, true. Cool, man. Thanks. That's all we had. Thanks for joining. I hope it was a good conversation and that you had fun.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. This is cool. I like this. Thank you.
Yep.